what's up? This is Simon from Devdectic with a new tutorial, and I'm excited because I think this is my first Ionic version 4 tutorial. So in this video I'll show you how you can create a login flow using Ionic 4. And I'm using currently the beta version, so at the time when this video will go live, or if you watch it at a later time, things might be a bit different, but I'm optimistic that most of the things will stay the same, especially as we're using some Angular stuff, and I'm pretty sure that this won't change over the time. So what we're gonna do is building the general login flow you might need in your applications. So we will have an outside area with a login and register page and a provider that takes care of handling the authentication, and then inside area which is protected by our provider. And we will do this the Angular way using the Angular router, but we will not use a real server or any thought of authentication. So it's still dummy implementation, but you can basically use it as a blueprint and then plug in your own backend with the authentication and the fields for the login. So the flow is already finished. You just need to put in some of your own stuff. So let's see how to do it. First of all, I've created a blank new project, and as I said, I am using the Ionic version 4 beta version, and in that version you have to specify type Angular if you want to create an Angular project. Perhaps this will even be the same at a later point, so I'm not completely sure. Then inside your project, first of all, we install the Ionic storage package, just because if you have, let's say, a JSON Web Token authentication, then you need a place to store the token, and we will fake this a bit by storing just something in our storage and then retrieving it at a later point. Then we can create some pages, and if we look into our app folder, we already see the home page, which we actually don't want. Let's remove this. This will break our routing, no problem. What you see is we can also specify a path like this, and that means the login page will be created under this public folder. So next to the public login, we of course also need a register page. And then we need a page for the members area. So inside the members folder, we will have the more or less protected routes in our example. Then we need a service, more or less the same like a provider we had before. And again, we can specify a path. So I will put them into services, and here's the authentication service. Now we get closer to the Angular world, because we generate an auth guard. And we were able to use stuff like this with Ion View Can Enter with Ionic version 3. And now we're simply using the Angular way to protect our routes, which is actually a lot easier to understand and to implement. So far, so good. Everything was used with the Ionic CLI. And now the final command is to generate a module, and here I'm using the Angular CLI, which works completely inside our Ionic project, which is just awesome. And I'm not sure if this generate module is already included with the Ionic CLI. I had problems finding this. So what we generate is a module in members, and it's called member routing, because we can see we already got the app routing up here. But we could add an authentication guard to all of the routes in here, but it's easier if we have like a child routing module and simply protect all the routes of that child. And -- flat simply means it is now generated in members, the module, hopefully in a second. And it's not created in an additional folder, so that's what flat means. So here's our member routing. We always got the testing files right next to them. You can see it also in the pages. So we got the module HTML, SCSS in TypeScript file like we always do, and also a testing file. All right, so now we can go ahead and run Ionic Serve in the background, so we can focus on our app. And at this point, I guess the app is running with an error. because we've messed up the routing module, but we will fix it in a second. But first, let's go to our app module, and what we need in here is the Ionic storage module, so we can store our token, and just like always, call it with for root. Oh, sorry, it's really hard to see anything in here. So just like always, it goes to the imports Ionic module, Ionic storage module for root. Everything else is fine so far already. And perhaps let's take a look at our routing module. What we can see in here is that all of our routes are already registered here. So we might need to change a bit of this later on, especially we don't have the home page anymore. So we can say the fallback redirects to login, path match full. Only if it's really an empty route, we will redirect to the login. Register is still fine, dashboard. That's something we might need to change. So if we save this now, perhaps we're even able to see our login page again, but it really doesn't matter at this point. Come on, are you with me? There we go. So now we got the login page in place and the home page is removed. Let's move on to our authentication stuff. As I said, we're gonna do it a very dummy way. So our authentication service, first of all, needs a token key under which we will store the auth token. So pick whatever you like, perhaps something more unique. Also, this is going to have an authentication state, which is a behavior subject. So we can subscribe to this behavior subject and we will initialize it with false, which means the user is not authenticated in the beginning of our app. And this import is actually wrong. It should look like this. We need the Ionic storage. So go ahead and pick the right one. Storage. The imports look not as I want them to look, because this is not correct. It should look like this. Anyway, no problem. And also perhaps the platform, but I think, yeah, this import works. So let's head over to a few functions. So of course we will have a login function, we will have a logout function. We might want to check if the current user is authenticated and do this without any async operation. And also we want to check if the user has a stored token in the storage. So in the beginning of the app, we can somehow automatically log in a user. Of course, in your case, you might need to check if the token is expired or add some more logic, but for now, this works. All right, let's perhaps start with a login. And in this case, we're not going to add any checks here. We will simply say the user is authenticated for whatever reason. So we set the token key and whatever value you might have. This means normally in the login you got the credentials, you make a request to your backend and you get back a token most of the time, and then you set this token to the local storage. So you get some result back, and within this function we set our authentication state to true. So everyone who's watching this behavior subject will be notified that the user is now authenticated. And for the logout, we're gonna do more or less the same, but we're gonna simply remove the token key. Well, we don't need the result, and then the user is not authenticated anymore. Pretty basic, works. Is authenticated. We need to check and do this if we can synchrone. So what we can do is return the current state of our authentication state, or the current value. So this is just reflecting the actual current state. It's not an async operation, so we can easily use this later on to check if the user is allowed to activate a root. And now, finally, we might want to check once the platform is ready. So we wait for the storage and everything to be ready and call our check token function. And in here, we do the same with a login. So we say get token key. And if we got something back in here, then we say the user is authenticated. Again, with your real logic, you might want to check if the token is valid, not expired, send it to the backend, whatever you can imagine. But for us, this is enough to check in the beginning if the user is authenticated and perform other stuff. So now to the auth guard. In this class, we want to check, and we just want to implement can activate. And thanks for this import again. It should look like this. And we inject our auth service, so authentication service. And then he complains because we haven't implemented can activate. And then we will return a Boolean, which is simply return this auth service is authenticated. So now if we protect a root with this auth guard, it will automatically check if the user is currently authenticated and then return true or false, depending on if the user is or not. Okay, this was no change to the general app, so it's still loading here. Nothing has changed so far. Now let's take a look at how we can actually use our created module in here. Or perhaps we should go to the module as well. Let's see, where's the logging? Here is the module. So we want to import this child routing module inside our real app routing module at the top. So we're gonna do more or less the same like we did in here. And I think, or I'm pretty sure you can also create a routing module with all the imports right away, but I haven't figured out how to do it exactly yet. The one thing that changes in this is that we not call it for root, but now we call it for child because those are child roots. And in here, perhaps I can copy this. I'm a bit lazy. I think the import here would work pretty nice. So one of our member roots is the dashboard, and it should load not members because we're already in that folder, but dashboard module. And this is a string because it uses lazy loading. So we're not importing the whole component or page in here, but just resolve it by this string with a hash. And there we go. So this is the routing for the child. And now if we import it correctly, we can actually already use this root. So let me look up my stuff and let's add quite big in here. Okay, let's call this members, the path, and can activate would be our auth guard service. And I will just remove this in a second. And then again, load children. And the children in this case are inside members slash member, member routing dot module slash member routing module. So just like with all the other stuff, it works like this. And perhaps I will just remove this for a second so we can see if it actually works. So we got the login route, which works. Let's see if register works as well. There we go. And if we now go to members, we haven't defined a route for members, but we got members and then the child dashboard. So let's try members slash dashboard. And of course cannot find member routing module. So a tiny issue in here. Let me check why the routing is not yet working. Okay, so the problem is I copied over, and of course this needs to be the member routing module. And if we then go back and go to members/dashboard, we now got everything we need. Members is working as well, but should redirect in the best case to the children. Perhaps we can do this later as well. Anyway, now if we put the can activate right here, let's see what happens. So reloading, and then let's remove this members/dashboard, and then God is not a function. That's right, most of the time God is really not a function. So what's wrong? Can activate, looks fine so far. Perhaps we're just coming from the wrong page, so we don't have any fallback. Well, everything is new. Let me check this. I'm actually not 100% sure. I haven't changed anything, but now the members dashboard is protected and we're not getting any errors. So I'm not completely sure. So let's just finish this example. And if we got the buttons, we can more easily test the real flow of the application. But first of all, let's head over to our app component, and inside the initialize app is a perfect place to check for the private auth service, authentication service, and then this auth service and authentication state subscribe, and then we get back a state. So if you've worked with Firebase, in most of the Firebase tutorials with authentication and Ionic 3, we got this subscription to the current state of the user inside the app component, and then we can easily route the user to specific parts if he is authenticated or not. We will do the same with our own behavior subject, and if we got something back, which means the authentication state is true or it changed to true, so the user is now authenticated and we can continue to the next page. Otherwise, we want to go to the login, and therefore we will now import the Angular router. So router, again, the import is not correctly. I'm not completely sure what's wrong. So if we want to go back to the login, we say navigate to array of strings, but we just want to go back to the login. And if we are authenticated, we want to go to members/dashboard. We could also do this by URL, but now it's really clear where we want to go. So now if the app is recompiling, we could perhaps add a log auth changed and then the state, so it becomes more obvious what is going on. The app is loading, it checks for the token, we haven't stored a token, so the beginning state is false. Okay, perfect. Now let's add some buttons so we can really test out the functionality. So within the login page, let's call this login, we add a button. Again, the syntax has changed a bit, so I'm also not 100% confident with everything yet, but I will do my best. So expand block, not just block, and then login. And this is again the same like before. So there were not so many changes like with Ionic 1 to version 2. This is a lot more clear than before. For the second button, let's do it a bit differently. So you even got to learn some Ionic 4 with this video. Color secondary, again, a bit different specified. And then we can directly specify link. So if we say register, the router in the background will automatically resolve this correctly and go to the register page. but we can also specify in terms of animations that the router direction in here is forward. So we're going to a new page, which is the register page in that case. And also, of course, we can use the router direction backward, which is what we can do inside the register page. So we don't need any buttons or any additional, let's say, logic in here. The only thing is that we now need to add our own back buttons. So normally with Ionic 3 they were added automatically. Now we have to specify them on our own. Slot start means at the top left, and then they have a special syntax called ion back button. We can specify a default link, which I would say makes sense to log in. So if for some reason the user directly goes to the register page, the back button will still be in place with the default go back to login. So I think we don't need an icon, it should be automatically in there. But inside the login page we still need the login function. Perfect, there we go. Private auth service. So simply use the authentication service all the time. Auth service, login. Normally you would have now the fields, pass them to the auth service, do the login and stuff like this. But in the end, the important part is that we set the key to the storage and say next to the behavior subject, which will then be recognized inside the app component TS. So I hope you can still follow all of this. Okay, we got the outside pages and I think we're actually pretty close to finishing this. So let's add a new button to the dashboard so we can also log out, and I think we're almost finished already. So button slot start and then ion button on click. We want to call the logout function, and inside we add an ion icon, slot icon only. So most of the things that were normally just outside are now in those properties, and name still the same, logout, and there we go, my dashboard. Now we just need the logout and it should go right here inside the dashboard page. And just like we did with the login, so auth service, authentication service, logout. If I'm too fast actually typing and not explaining enough, please leave a comment below and I will try to do this more in detail, perhaps even explain this again. Just let me know. Okay, so we're not subscribing or showing a spinner here at the login or logout. This is up to you. And also we don't need any routing logic in here. So we don't need a then block and say navigate back, because again, this will be handled at the top inside the app component where we are subscribed to our authentication state. So let's save all of this and let's see. We're on the login page and we can go to the register page and we can go back. We should also be able to go to the register page. Okay, we're not able to go to the register page because we're setting the login inside the app component. Perhaps this could even be improved to go to the URL the user wanted to navigate to, but let's keep it like this. Also, let's try to go to members dashboard, and you see we're coming back to login because we're not authenticated. Now let's change this. If we do the login, you see the log auth changed true. We're inside members dashboard, so we could also go there. You see if the app, if we navigate to the back, to the app back, we're at the login, and then the auth change is recognized because we were loading the token from the storage and we are immediately inside the dashboard. So we can go there back all the time. And if we do the logout, the auth changes again to false and we're not able to access this route anymore. So this is how you can implement a basic login, logout authentication flow inside your Ionic version 4 app. Again, I'm using the beta version, so some things might change, but I don't think the general syntax will change, and also the Angular routing logic, I'm pretty sure won't change over the next weeks. If you have any questions about this, feel free to ask below. It was quite a lot of code, so perhaps check out the related tutorial. And also make sure to subscribe to this channel. More Ionic version 4 videos are coming. I'm super excited about this new version. It's so amazing to use the Angular CLI or the Angular router directly inside our Ionic project to have the same structure like an Angular web application. You see, I'm really fired up for this topic, so subscribe, and also make sure to check out the ionicacademy.com. Especially with this new version, it's important to stay up to date and get the right learning resources. So check out the ionicacademy.com if you want great training resources on Ionic. I'll see you inside the next video. Have a great day and take care.